Welcome to Magic in the Ordinary. Today it is my joy and privilege to welcome author and coach Dr. Lee Baucom. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Can you share a little bit about your background as an author and a coach?
Sure. So I've been working with couples for over 3 decades. And at the beginning, I was finishing up my dissertation when I turned to my wife and I said, I kind of do more coaching than therapy. And I was also frustrated with how therapy was going. And so I immediately, after she stuck with me through two masters and a PhD, launched into 3 years of training as a coach. I was already practicing, but she had to put up with more classes for me. And the reason was because I was frustrated with the ineffectiveness of marital therapy in particular. And so after a while, you realize you have to like say what you do believe. And so I wrote about that. And this was in 1999. I put it on the internet. It was a website that I created in 99. It was like so last century at this point,
Wow.
right? It's forever ago. And that just kind of started a business I didn't see coming. I continued to, I was seeing people in an office, but I was coaching people from around the world who came to me through the book, and that that into the system. But what I didn't realize for probably 2 years is I had built a business by accident. And so then I started writing the other books more intentionally. Some of them I wrote just to say, this is what I think in this field, particularly my thriving books. But the others were built to help bring people, if it resonated with them, that it would bring them into my world, my work world. And so then I started having conversations with authors. And that's where I started working with authors because they were where I was in 99, where they had a book and I thought, well, they just wrote a book. And so I was at a conference that my publisher had put on, and I was sitting with this author. And since I was helping put it on, they had already given me everybody's book so I would know who they were. And I read this guy's book that I happened to be sitting with him. I'm like, hey, I love your book. What are you going to do with it? And he just had this blank look and he said, what do you mean? And I said, what comes after the book? And he said, I wrote the book. And I was like, I know, but what are you going to do from here? And he didn't have an answer. So he came back to me at the last dinner we were having. It was a big celebratory dinner after this event. He said, what did you mean by that? And I told him my experience. And I said, I just feel like there's something in there that you haven't built out. So we, John, on a napkin, just charted out what might be possible for him. And I started going, how many times am I going to have this conversation? And it turned out a lot. So I started turning my attention to people who were either at the end of a book or in the midst of writing a book to ask, how are you going to build a business from that? So that's how we got to here.
Wow, that's incredible. So jumping in, what are some things like what does happen after a book and why does this confuse people? Like you're saying, he gave you that blank look.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people think that the book sales is what they were going for.
Okay.
And so they think they've got the book. And I mean, at the risk of being a downer here, it's not likely that the book sales are going to be what does it for them. Now, my dad knows exactly what I do. I've built my career off of books. And so I think it's probably been 4 times now that we've gone into a Barnes and Noble and he's looked around. And he goes, I just don't see how any author could make any money off of books because, look how many books there are. And I'm like, Dad, this is what I do, right? And so that's the feeling that a lot of people have is they're going to have the book that breaks out. And that's not likely to be the case. Just statistically speaking, is it possible? Absolutely. And I hope every author has that, but it's not going to happen for a lot of authors. And so the question is, what do you do with that?
Mm.
The book sales is not the business. The book itself has a message in it that can develop into that business. And so that's the reason for the blank stare because I mean I've got 7 babies sitting beside me, and each one looks like a book, but they're a baby to the person who created them, and that's how it feels to the author. Like they gave birth, they're done. It's in the world. that's going to go do its thing. And that's another conversation with another author. He was like, I feel like I'm 95% done. I've got 5 more% that I've got to do just to be on social media and that. And I went, you've got that reversed. You're 5% done.
Oh, whoa.
And if so you think about how I built this. So my business I started building in 99. I didn't realize I was building it though into 2001. So let's call that, 25 years of that business.
Okay.
That's a long time for a business. And if I had at the beginning missed the opportunities that allowed because I built it a piece by at a time, like one step at a time, I might have gone with a big flash. But 95%, so for sure in my case, it's even less than that. 5% of the time I created that book would be an overstatement of what I've done with that book, how long it's lasted. So it's not that it's the hard stuff, but it's the fun stuff. And I will admit I have a love-hate relationship with writing. I'm dyslexic. I'm not the person you would expect to be writing books, and here I'm writing books. And so I love the fact that a book is a great way to put out a message.
Mm.
I don't love the labor of it. That just writing it is tough. Having the thoughts, not a problem. Writing it, that's where the labor comes in. And so I'm in some ways relieved that I've got that 5% out of the way and I can step into the
Mm.
rest of it and enjoy that process.
Wow. Okay, this makes me think of a lot of writers I talk to. They say, I love writing. I'm so excited for that portion of things. But once the book is done, they like suffer through that next piece of marketing,
Yeah.
whatever other components there are. And that's kind of a dreaded component for them. What
Yeah.
would you have any words of advice for them there?
Yes. Yes. And this is the shift that they need to make.
Okay.
The reason that people don't like the marketing is because they feel that it's them that they're selling, like they
Oh.
are having to be there. I don't believe that about my books. What I am trying to get into the world is a message I believe in. So
Hmm.
I want to go the other way. If I believe that I have a message that would help people and I don't share it and I don't try to get it in the world, I've not been true to what's important to me. I've not
Mhm.
been true or helpful to people who need that message.
Yeah.
So marketing is a way of letting people know that the message is out there. And if you make that shift, it's no longer, oh gosh, I've got to, you know, get myself out there. It's I am there to represent my message and let people know about that message.
Mm. It's really helping others then. It's kind of this outward focus. Nice.
That is what the message is about. So what the people will write about is they birthed that book and now it's in the world. There's a message in the world, and we live in a world that could use a lot of messages to move people in a positive direction. So
Mm.
that's that's what I see it. I'm trying to launch this message to help people, whether it's helping couples have better marriages, it's helping individuals thrive, it's helping people to figure out how to forgive things in their life. All of those are things that I desperately believe in and that I believe help the world. Now, is everybody going to read it and love it? Nope. And I'm okay with that. It's
Mhm.
whether somebody reads that and it makes a difference to somebody. So the other way I change it in my head when I'm having these marketing things is I am imagining that one person. So one of the things I like about these podcast interviews is I'm talking to one person, right? And so that fits into how I do everything. When I'm doing my own podcast and I'm recording myself, I'm imagining that person that's there and I'm talking to one person, the one person that would make a difference to. When I'm writing a book, I'm writing it to one person, the one person it would make a difference to, not billions of people, but one person that I want to hear it because my message might be important to that person, not everyone. And that changes the way I speak, it changes the way I write, and it changes the way I think about the marketing.
Mm, I love that. That's it's very personal then. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, every change is personal, right? I mean, that's what we're. And so I look at the beautiful artwork behind you, and when it lands in somebody's house, right? That's that one person. It's personal to them, and it's the same for any message. It's landing on that one person that it matters to.
I love that. So you talk about finding hidden frameworks within a person's book. Can you share a little bit more about this? How does this work? How does someone look for frameworks within their book?
Yeah, some people know their framework.
Okay.
And I assumed because I'm such a framework kind of person. So, I mean, it's kind of I'm a person who likes to kind of look universally down to the specific instead of the specific out. Back in math class, I was always a year behind because I was asking the teacher, why do we do that? And the teacher's looking at me going, you just do it. And I'm like, no, I need to know like why. And they thought I was being problematic. And I was just like, doesn't make sense to me. And the next year, I remember how many times I would go, oh, that's why you do that last year. I wish I had known that last year, right? And so, because that's just the way I view things, I often see things that people miss. When I was a grad student, the professors would send people to me that were stuck on their theses or their dissertations to help them find their way through. I didn't know why, and it turned out that they had spotted something in me that I was not aware of at that point, that I could spot the framework that they were trying to get to, and we could talk about that. So the framework is how, for most books, is like, how do you do this? And this is true. So back to your painting, there's a framework of how you do the painting, of what you think about that you want to paint, of how you go about it that is uniquely yours. You might have learned techniques from somebody else, but then you make them your own.
Yeah.
That's a framework for how you paint. And so a book has a framework in it, right? And it basically is how somebody does something. But the problem is, if you are always doing it, you don't often recognize that that's unique to you.
Yeah.
Somebody else might point it out and go, "Oh, I love how you do this shading or this coloring or choosing whatever." That's all that somebody else. And you might go, "Yeah, I guess I do." Now that I now that you're saying that, but I didn't realize it. And the same, I'll be sitting with an author and I'm like, this is your framework. And many times I've been in the middle of an interview and they're telling me all about it. And I'll bring it down to two, three, four things. And they're like, I've never thought of it that way. And that's the framework, right? That's identifying it. So being able to identify the framework helps them understand how they generally approach whatever it is they're writing about, whatever topic it is that they're going after. It's their unique way, their thumbprint on how they do things.
That makes sense. So, to help me better understand it, I've heard the term philosophy, like my writing philosophy, my business philosophy. Is framework parallel to that at all, or what are some differences?
Yeah, some people will actually be writing about their business philosophy, right? That's a kind of a broad, this is how I think about the concepts there. And that would be a framework that they're creating to explain their philosophy, but still how they explain it, like the metaphors they use, the way they weave it together is still their framework. And so for somebody who does that kind of writing, I've often asked them to tell me what are the 5 points or 4 points or 3 points they would make in a speech.
Okay.
And that tells me what their framework is. If I'm talking to a coach, I often say, how do you work with a client? And they'll tell me, well, we start here and we end here. And I'm like, tell me the midpoint, right? What are you doing? Like, how do you do
Mhm.
that? So to give you kind of a real life example, a lot of times I realized that people were stuck trying to forgive stuff and they couldn't figure it out.
Mm.
So I created a book that's 6 steps to how you do that.
Okay.
And the way I did it is I sat down and asked the question, when I'm working with a client who is stuck on something, how do I lead them through the process? Like, what are the pieces? How
Okay.
am I thinking about it? And it came out to be 6 steps. So that formed the book. And so then if somebody is stuck, I can say, here are the 6 steps to do that. And it's the same for most books. There is something in there of like I do the 1, 2, 3. So I'm frameworky enough that I'll have when I'm trying to teach something now, I'm going, okay, how can we lay this out? So you go, oh, I remember that. So I have a pivot framework when I'm working with couples, a secure framework, a shield framework, and they're acronyms. If somebody names an acronym or they're 4 steps or 5 steps, they are onto their framework. And if they aren't, then that's a useful way of at least framing that for themselves of going, how would I do that? What are the steps that I take?
Wow. I think it's just incredibly helpful insights to reading, especially nonfiction. Like I come from the fiction world,
Mm.
and I've talked to people about writing more nonfiction sides of things, and I find it very, very difficult, but I think the framework idea gives some structure to it in a way that makes it easier or more clear, I think.
So I've had some conversations with fiction authors, and I'll point out that they do have a framework too, like the
Okay.
world they're creating.
Yeah.
And so if you think about is the narrator going to be someone you could count on or not? That's a framework.
Mm.
And so we've had a lot of books that you couldn't trust the narrator and you just didn't know it for a while, right? So that
Yeah.
sneaks up on you. Or the people who actually do the world building of fantasy. I mean, that is a framework that they're creating of how those pieces fit together. And so when I talk to a person who's like, I don't really have a framework. I just talk about this magical way thing. I'm like, so tell me the underpinnings of the magic that you're describing. And they tell me all of this depth that they've created. I'm like, that's a framework. I mean, you've created a world framework because you're describing how the world operates for you.
Wow.
So it exists for the fiction world too.
I love that. Um, so how could somebody build a business from a book? What would that look like?
So let's go with nonfiction. Although there are some fiction ways this applies to. Well, let's just talk about the fiction for a minute. I've talked to people who I will say, so what is your gift, as a fiction writer? And they're like, I do a really good job of thinking through plots and looking at the plot holes. There are a lot of people who are writing fiction who could really use somebody to help them with that. Or they talk about the fact that they have a certain method of writing. They could teach that, they could coach somebody through that. So even in the fiction world, there are ways that their book demonstrates that they can do it. They've got proof.
Okay.
So let's go though with more nonfiction. So I often point to people to people that authority, which is what a lot of nonfiction people are trying to build. The first part of authority is author. So they're establishing their authority with the books. That's what that does. So that's the first thing that I always point out. You're doing that. The second is that they are now identifying their framework, so they know how they do what they do.
Mm.
And so then there are two more pieces that I think are very important. These are the kind of starting points. One is to ask who who is going to be attracted to that. Like, who are the people that need to hear that? Because that's going to tell them how they need to speak and where they need to speak. Like, where do they need to be doing their marketing efforts? If, somebody is, for instance, and this is, I'll be self-revelatory here. I write about saving your marriage, and I've now, in the last, I don't know, 2 months, been on 5 divorce podcasts. Now, you may go, that's probably a mismatch for who needs to hear it. My thing is, there are some people who listen to a divorce podcast who are not quite sure. So
Okay.
I'm in the realm of, where I need to talk with people, but not dead on. And so if I were being picky about where I would want to spend my time, that wouldn't be it.
Mm.
So if I'm starting to be specific early on, it's where do those people exist, the people I need to talk to. So that's why you need to know who you're speaking to. And then to ask the question, so how does it need to fit my life? So
Mm.
another story. I had a person I was working with, and I said, so what are you going to do with your book? He said, well, I guess I'm going to public speak. And I just observed that that doesn't sound like a ringing excitement about what he was going to do. And I said, why? And he said, well, I have a friend who is a very successful public speaker who wrote a book, and that's what led to that. And so he told me that's what I need to do. And so I said, it doesn't seem to be what's exciting you. Tell me about that. And so he said, well, I don't like being away from home. I really like being around the house with my family. I don't really like speaking in public, although I can do that. I just don't enjoy it.
Mm.
But, and this is where he was stuck, I've spent thousands of dollars putting stuff together to do that. And I've already made contacts. And so I just asked a simple question. Okay, let's say you're successful at this. 5 years from now, you're as busy as your friend is. How's that going to be? And he said, miserable. I don't want to do that. So that's a mismatch between who he is and what the business needs to look like, right? And that has to be aligned. We have to be in a sustainable relationship with our business. So I've been doing this now, I mean, this part for 25 years, and you can't do that if you don't like what you do each day. And so I've built it based on what I like to do and filling in the blanks where necessary. But that doesn't mean every day I'm doing everything I want to do. But the general trend of that, like the core of that, like for him, the big thing he would be doing is public speaking, not his thing, not going to work. So it's a question of whether the author can find the right form for the business that will fit their life and be something that their audience can take in.
Wow. I like, yeah, I love these points. And I think the authorship or the ownership, the authority part of things really fascinates me. I've seen some authors or some writers want to write about things. Um, in the fiction world, I've kind of seen, maybe they don't get out as much, but they want to write these books. And for
Mm,
me, I feel like you can create a really cohesive fiction world when you've had this life experience, when you've seen maybe different cultures or different countries. And sometimes I think about this in terms of the authority piece of things when you're writing nonfiction as well, of how do you build authority in a certain area? And
yeah.
I know you've gone on to get degrees, you have this huge experience behind you. What might that look like for somebody who's just getting into the field? They might not have those years of experience or the life experience, but they still really want to come to the table and write. What are some, do you have any insights for them there?
Yeah. So I mean, your comment about fiction is interesting because the way you do it, you want to have those life experiences, and then there are people who are so inner driven, like their world comes from within, that in some ways they insulate themselves because they're weaving from internally. And so there are different ways of doing that. And it's the same with nonfiction. So I do think that it's hard for a nonfiction writer to actually write a powerful book if they haven't done enough to have created that thumbprint of their framework. If they're just repeating what others they've been taught, so if they're that early in the career, it's going to be tough. Years ago, I was at a coaching big international coaching conference, and I was sitting with this person, and I said, "So what do you do?" He said, "Oh, I do executive coaching, like high level executive coaching." This guy was probably early 20s. I mean, I didn't ask, but that'd be my best guess. And I said, "Oh, wow, have you been at that level?" I mean, sometimes people do a startup, and he said, "Oh no, I just want to do the coaching." And I said, "Okay, and how is that going?" And he admitted he didn't have one client yet. And the reason he didn't have one client yet is he didn't have the authority at that point. It's very hard for a 20 something to be speaking to a likely 45, 55-year-old person who
Mhm.
is at that executive level. Right? There's a mismatch. And so my thing was you might want to start honing your skills at a lower level and then work your way up the ladder.
Mhm.
And that's the same as what we're doing here, right? Of how do you work your way up the ladder? A book is a piece of that. And there are some people who are brilliant and can write a great piece, even though they haven't spent a lot of time there because they picked it up fast. So it's not the age thing that matters. There is an experience piece that matters. Like I've
Right.
done enough to master this. And so mastery is where we start to hone in on how we do things. I'm sure that how you do your art has changed over the years, and how you do your writing has changed over the years. And that's partly finding your kind of your voice and your approach. It doesn't mean you don't do it earlier, right? Because you can't ever get there if you don't. It just may be that that doesn't set everything you want it to be early on. I have a good friend who's an author. His first book was very different from the genre, and he actually does fiction, very different from the genre he writes now. His later ones have become much more successful. He would not have written those successful books had he not been down the road of the other ones because he was honing his skills along the way before he found his voice. Once he found his voice, it took off.
Mm. I really appreciate your insight into experience versus age. Because like you're saying, it kind of sounds like you put in the hard work, you build those skills. It doesn't really matter your age. So anyone can do it. It's just a matter of putting in that work, which is it's such a good reminder. What's one thing you think a book has to deliver, or what are audience members looking for? And maybe that's too broad of a question, but yeah.
I do think that in fact I'm sitting here writing one now, and my initial question is, does somebody read the initial part and go, "That's me. I need to hear this." So that is probably the most important part to get down in the beginning is can I get the attention of the people that need to hear this message? You need the message, right? But they have to be able to read it and go, "That's me," or "That's not me." And I think that differentiator is the difference between a strong book and just a general book. Um, when I talk with someone, I'll often say, "So, who's your book for?" And if they say, "Oh, it's good for everyone,"
Hmm.
it's probably not going to be a book for everyone. That doesn't exist. And if it's for everyone, it's for no one. And so when they're able to say, "Oh, it's for this group," so I've talked with it before. Let's get more defined. What do they look like? What do they do? How do they think? What's important to them? That helps for them to lock in on the avatar, to use that term. It's locking in on who is their ideal listener. And so if the first thing doesn't help them either go, "Yeah, that's not for me," or "That is definitely me," it's going to be a miss. It's just not going to get to the audience.
Okay. I love that. What are some common pitfalls that you see new writers falling into?
The first one is not writing,
Oh
right?
no.
Um, so I think I've written a book from about every different way you can, other than letting somebody else write it for me. One of my early books, I actually had a book contract, and I was avoiding that one like the plague. Um, and it was a book that I thought was very important, which was the part of the thing was I didn't want to disappoint the publisher, and I had to get out of that, right? That's a block. But while I was avoiding that one, I had this really good idea for a podcast. And I was in the shower and had this great idea. And my wife is used to kind of seeing it where I'm jumping out and running to find a pen or a piece of paper wrapped in a towel and going, "Well, let me get that down." So she didn't think much about it. But I did the podcast almost immediately after I took a shower, and I came down and went, "Oh, that's a way bigger than what I thought it was when I first had this idea." And so that led to me doing this massive writing project that I wrote the book in maybe 3 months. I mean, it just and that was with me working full time. It was like when I was not in a session, I was writing. When I got home, I was writing. I'd get up early. That's not a sustainable way, particularly, but it got me through it. After that, I became more disciplined in how I would do it. So um, I would set aside an hour in the morning, just an hour, and I would write from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning. And wherever I was at 6 o'clock, hands off, I walked away. And I like to be in the middle of a sentence. So I'd come back to the middle of the sentence to get my thought going again. But yeah. And part of that was because I had a professor who made it his lifetime, his professional career to write 15, and this is back in the days of typing on a typewriter, 15 typewritten pages a day. He did it every single day. Being a professor, he had that room to do it. Long after he retired, he dropped that down to 12 pages a day. You think about that, that's a lot of books in a year. And he had the bibliography to prove it. For me, it was an hour. That's what I had. But I did it consistently. And so I've had conversations with people who, they want to write a book, but they're waiting for inspiration. And my thing is, you don't wait for inspiration, you show up, and the inspiration comes along when you get into the habit of it. So waiting for inspiration is a big trap. Another way I've written books is by doing those podcast episodes. So if you look at some of my series, you're like, that was his book. Like those 12 episodes became his book. And so I would outline it, speak it, use that as a way of thinking it out loud, and then type it, write it out. And so there are lots of ways of doing it. You got to find the one that works for you, whether it's doing a sprint or doing a marathon or finding some other way except for waiting for inspiration.
Mm.
That's the problem. So trap number one is not doing the writing. Trap number two is being afraid that somebody's not going to like you.
Yes.
So let me just say they're not going to.
I love that.
But if you don't upset people, you won't find the people who do like you, who do love you. And so that for me is the big thing. So my daughter's a Taylor Swift fan, and I often tell her that my philosophy is shake it off because I get the people who don't like me. They're happy to share that. That's one of the things the internet has allowed. People are happy to let me know. And sometimes I'll read, some of them are kind of interesting. And I'll read it to my wife, and she's like, I don't know how you do that. I'm like, you shake it off. I mean,
Mm.
honestly, their opinion is none of my business. I'm just not going to be caught by that because then I have these and I can pull out the ones of the people who were helped, loved it, whatever. And so if you're always trying to avoid having some people not like you, you'll never find the people who truly do love you. And so don't be afraid of not of having people who don't like you. That's what makes it good. Um, I think another trap is believing that you have to get everything in the book.
Mm.
That's not possible either. A book is really good at telling people what's up and why. The how piece of it, sometimes when people put that in, they leave the audience thinking that that's it, that's all they had to do, and there's more work to it. And that's where coaching or a course or other programs can come in, which, by the way, builds the business. So it gives you a runway for the business, but it also doesn't give a false sense of ease to the reader when they recognize that maybe it takes more than that. Now, I do lay out some ways of doing things, but I have other books where I'm just like, let me tell you. So, Marriage Fail Point, this one, it's not a big book, but it explains why marriages get into trouble. There's not enough room and how short it is because I wanted people to be able to read it easily. And they go, oh, that's me. And then I have a part on it. I mean, I just turn right to it. What now? That's the starting
Mm.
point. But what now is the final piece of it. It's not the bulk of the book because I want them to see that there is a starting point. They might need some extra help.
That's very encouraging because one of the things, books are overwhelming in any moment when you're writing something that large. But I think there's sometimes I can feel some pressure of I have to make sure I'm saying everything to support the reader the best I can. What can I fit in here? What am I leaving out? But having that shift in mindset of you don't have to fit everything in, and actually that can be helpful for people, like you're saying. It's a shorter book. They can get through it more quickly and then come, to your website to get the next book that's helpful or coaching services. I think that's a
Mm.
really nice mindset shift where you don't have to give every single piece of a certain puzzle to the people right off the bat.
And in fact, this is the trend for a lot of nonfiction to go shorter. There used to be the belief, and I don't know how many, you may have had the same experience where I would read a book and I would go, well, that author managed to cram 30 pages into 220 pages. And that just didn't make sense, right? They had this, I would read the first chapter and I'm like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
The rest of it is you're just saying it again.
Mhm.
And we realize that because the statistics on who finishes the book are abysmal for an author. And so it's less than 10% who finish a book.
Oh,
So if you're giving them a long one to get through, you're, I mean, you're just, so I was talking with a person the other day, he came and he said, well, I finished my book. And I said, okay, well, tell me about it. Well, it's 425 pages. And I'm like, I mean, you do what you want, but 425 pages is a daunting task for somebody, no matter how much they want to be. That's just daunting for anyone. Not fiction. I mean, and I know the fiction world is like the opposite direction right now. The fantasy books are thick and people are devouring them. But in the nonfiction space, that's a whole different ballgame. And so there are more and more books, and I've talked with the publishers who want them to be shorter. Like 100 pages is like 120 pages is what they're aiming for, especially for a new author, because it's cheaper for them and because they know that people can actually get through that message in a shorter amount of time.
Wow. Love those insights. I didn't realize what a low percentage of people finish books.
Hmm.
I think that's a little bit alarming, but also it's like a really good wake-up call to
Yeah.
remember when you're writing the book, making sure you're thinking of those people who maybe they don't want to go through 300 pages of the same topic.
Well,
Um,
there's some research shows that less than 50% ever open a book that they get. Now, recognize that you might have gotten it as a gift, right? And so you're like, oh, thanks. But there are a lot of people who never even crack the cover because they feel like they did. The conversation with someone who was trying to work on their marriage, and I said, "So what have you done?" He said, "Well, I bought a book." I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "I haven't done anything. It's been sitting on my bedside table." I'm like, that's not going anywhere. So we often feel like we did something because we bought the book, right? And so that's the first thing. But the other thing is, and I think a lot of people who get discouraged by that don't recognize that sometimes people read a book for a specific piece of, especially nonfiction, for a specific piece of information that they may get in the first part of the book and they're done. But they got what they wanted out of it. And so I often am like, well, you've got to turn it over to the reader. They've got to choose whether that they're going on the journey and how far down that journey they're going to go with you. Maybe they just need to go part way down the path and they've got it. Maybe they just have it because that feels good, but they know how to contact you. And I'll tell you what's at the beginning of my book and at the end of my book is how to find me. So you don't have to read very far to figure out where to find me if you're interested in that. They indicated that that might be something because they bought the book. So I don't think the figures are as damning as it may feel for people who are like, why should I even put in the effort? Because it changes your thinking, because it puts the message out there, because there are ones who read all the way to the end, and then there are those who just read until they get what they need, and that's all good.
mm, I love that. I was really fascinated by your Thrive journal on your website. So I was just curious if you could share a few tips for somebody who's looking to level up their life, thrive. What tips would you share?
Yeah, so the Thrive Journal is I used it for coaches with my coaching clients for a long time, and it was a morning thing and an evening thing, and I would send them a PDF. They printed it out, and they just printed out as they went. And one day I went, well, that's really working for them. I could see the changes. And so the setup is in the morning. You have it's this is so I guess it was yesterday. Someone said, "Is this just like a gratitude journal?" I'm like, well, I mean, yes and no. Yes, I do have a place where you start your day with some gratitude because we have such strong scientific evidence for how that affects our day. So absolutely, I'm going to use that. But it starts a process for you to be going, what's most important to me today?
Mm,
Like, what has to happen today? How do I want to show up? Who do I want to be today? So we start with that intention in the morning. And then in the evening, you come back and go, how did I do? Not as a
mm,
way of going, bad me, I failed, but to go, okay, what do I take from that? I'm a big believer in the growth mindset. And the
yes.
growth mindset says, whatever happens, given where I am, what now is possible? So I get to the evening, I'm like, didn't do that, didn't do that. So I'm going to work on that again tomorrow. What did I learn about why I failed at that today? I'm going to work on that tomorrow so I'm better equipped. So we learn from both when we do it. I mean, that just is creating the kind of the neuronal grooves to keep doing it. But we also learn of why we didn't do what we set out to do. And we can begin to, so, okay, what got in my way? How do I change that for tomorrow? And so the whole thing is a process of incremental changes as you go each day to do a little bit better.
Very intentional. That sounds wonderful. I've been personally shocked at how gratitude can change things that I didn't think could change. Even like I ran a marathon and physically I felt like I was able to do it partly just because of gratitude. Just thinking like, wow, I'm so grateful that could run a little bit even though I got injured that day. Like it just shifted everything. And I didn't realize it could like physically give you the strength or somehow give you the mindset where you can keep going further. But I've been blown away. So I think it's cool to hear the science is right there.
Well, it's interesting because what do most people do when they're running a marathon? They go, "Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, my ankle hurts. Oh, everything hurts."
Yeah.
And I ran a trail marathon, and so I mean it was my wife had run a marathon. She and I ran the same year. I did a lot of adventure racing for a while, and so that year I was doing a trail run, and so she went to Chicago for her marathon, and we were cheering her on the side, and so it was a couple of months later, and I was doing my trail marathon, and she's like, "Do you want us to go?" And I'm like, "You can't see me. I'm going to be on a trail. There's no spectators, and a
Wow.
couple stops along the way is where you could get." Water or whatever and drop out if you needed to, so you'd have to limp your way to wherever. And they drove us out on the bus. They dropped us off, and off we went. And so the way I worked that whole day was to be in awe of what was going on around me. I was like,
Wow.
"Oh man, that's such a beautiful sky. Oh, look at the leaves. It's so beautiful here. Look at that stream. It's so beautiful here." There are a couple of times I'm like, I cannot believe I have to go up this, incline. But the most of the time, I was doing the same thing because I know that that keeps our brain in a different place. There's just a different mode of, are we grateful? Are we experiencing what's there? Are we using the power of all to keep us moving forward? Or are we focused on what's uncomfortable? Because of course, 26 miles is uncomfortable. There's just no way to do that in comfort. And so the question is, can we find a way of overriding that? And so I was probably the same thing you're doing, of going, okay, I'll go one more mile. At the
Yeah.
end of that mile, I'll do another mile. And we just kept on clicking. I'll get up this hill and I'll make a decision at the top of this hill whether I'm going to continue or not. And at the top of the hill, I'm like, I'll get to the bottom of the hill and make that decision. And on it goes until you're like, oh, I finished it. So yeah, gratitude is a great way of doing that.
I love that. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I also saw a jujitsu journal on your page. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I did that with a colleague of mine. She's in the publishing world, and she did mixed martial arts. Actually, did lots of fights, and tough woman. And I started jujitsu and did it for a number of years until we moved. Well, until the pandemic, and then I started back, and then we moved. So when we were talking together at a couple of events, we were just talking about training and how you can think intentionally about training. And so we decided to do this journal, and we just laid it out and went, what would be helpful for me to have as I'm doing the training? How can we make it so that we can be more intentional? I was watching on the sideline as some people would bring in like scraps of paper to write on when they were trying to take notes. And I was sitting there going, that's not working, but I think we might be able to come up with a solution to make this work.
Yes.
And so my colleague had come to me and she said, how do you feel about doing that? Would you like to work on that together? I'm like, yes, because I'm watching these people and it's not working. So let's make something that works. So it was designed to help people be intentional about their training and to be able to think through what it is. Because I mean, jujitsu is chess in motion. You're just trying to play this game. And do you have the next move? And so by your reaction, you know plenty about jujitsu as I'm talking, right? So,
My brother does it, so
okay.
he's done pro matches. He loves it.
Okay, yeah, and so he would know that there's like moves that you make from guard position, or the different way standing moves and different moves that I won't go all through them. And so had a way where you could mark that on the edge, and then just looking on the edge, you could see all of your different techniques on where they would come, whether they would be defensive or offensive, or would they come from the guard or top position or wherever they were, side position, standing. And then you could kind of find it quickly on what you wanted to review. And then you had practice notes like, I had a problem with this, or I knew that it was successful because I felt this. And that was one of the big ones we would push people on is, when you're muscling through a move, and when you're not, because you're like, oh, that's butter. That went. And jujitsu is such a leveraged sport that if you're using too much energy, you need to identify that and correct it. And so the journal would help people do that.
I love that, and I love like that process again of you saw a need and you jumped in. And I think there's a lot of writers I hear who are like, wouldn't it be great if someone wrote this? I'm like, yeah, I think you've thought a lot about the problem.
And there you go. Well,
Yes.
which is, I mean, the thing that people often said is you ought to write the book that you need. And
Mhm.
I have so. I have a strong marriage, so I didn't write my books on marriage based on what I needed, except for professionally, I needed to give that information. I wanted to write a book based on what I thought people needed to go. And so that was my need, right? There are two different levels of need. Like, do I need that? Or do I think others might need that and I have that? So either one is a great method, but you're right. I've said to many people, they'll start talking to me. I'm like, you write it. Don't tell me to write it. You write that book. That's yours.
I love that. Do you have any final piece of advice for listening writers?
Yeah, do it. Do the work. And so that's the one I hear from so many people who are like, I want to write a book. I'm like, T these days in this age, if you will write the book, you can make a book. It's no longer a gatekeeper. That has changed, and even the time I've been there, the tools that we have now, if you will put in the effort, and there are lots of ways of making that effort easy. The only one I would critique right now is don't let AI write your book.
Mhm.
There are a lot of things it can do for research, but don't let it write. So put that out. But there are lots of other ways of doing that and do the work because that helps you think through and that helps you process and creates those frameworks along the way. If you want to make a book, there are ways of making a book that never existed in history that make it so easy. We're on this very front edge of how easy it has become to be an author.
I love that. That's so encouraging and inspiring. If people want to read your books, connect with you, where can they find you?
So if you're an author and you want to build out a business, that's at booktobusinessblueprint.com. Booktobusinessblueprint.com. I actually have a podcast there. It's called After the Book. It's like my experience of doing that and how people can do that. And we actually have a starter map that will help people figure that out. So booktobusinessblueprint.com. For a look at my own books, you can go to thriveology.com/books, and that'll just put you on an Amazon page that has all of them. So Thrive, Thrive, and then OLOGY.com/books.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Oh,
fantastic.
thank you. It's fun.